Hey, I'm Caroline Holt, and I am serious about sales enablement. I presented this at Sales Experience SES for Sales Enablement Society, which is now Revenue Enablement Society, in 2022, but it still holds up today. So check out my deep dive insights on intake if you are in the sales enablement function. So the first thing I would say, particularly when you're working with a business that's trying to scale, is that intake is super critical. Just like if we were doing discovery with a prospect or customer, we would want to get a little bit of qualification details and data about what this is, what the challenge is, so that we could help them. So the first thing I'd start with is building out some sort of internal form. Resist the temptation to let folks slack you with requests for things, because it's really unusual that you would get enough data and detail from that. So things like contact details and the type of support they think they need and whether they've got support on this before, particular files that would be useful to you, subject matter experts, why they think whatever it is that they have today isn't working. It's really helpful in setting the context, as well as asking them for a level of priority and likely level of complexity. We used Reich at a former role where I was leading the enablement at Bonterra, but you can do this even in a basic Google form, and that will give you some context coming into a conversation. The conversation is really critical. So having that quote unquote discovery call is really important. So think about setting the goal and agenda the way you would in a discovery call, discovering need, and then being consultative, providing specific next steps. So the goal and outcome, starts with thanks for taking some time to talk to me. Here's what I understand your challenge to be. Thanks for submitting the form. Or if they haven't submitted the form, this is the opportunity to say, hey, I'd love to work through some questions with you to ensure that I understand what your questions are and make sure that we can deliver the right type of outcome for you. Discovery. I use a discovery framework the same way. Whatever you're using for your reps is what I would encourage you to use for enablement. So whether that's Spin, Spiced, which is my own proprietary framework, anything that you need to make sure that you really understand what's going on and why they think that they need this solution. Typically, leaders are really quick to solution, but you are the subject matter expert in understanding enablement. And then the last piece is once they've told you a little bit about what they care about, work with them on a potential solution, right? Based on what you're telling me, here's a little bit about what I'm thinking. Then you want to get a little bit into what's in and out of scope. You want to get into prioritization of timing and who may need to be involved in the next steps. Here's the example of what I used at the Sales Enablement Society conference. I just used a little bit of spin selling to help. So understanding context, things like situation, pain, whether this is a skill, process, knowledge, or resource that's needed. What does status quo look like? Isn't it working? Then getting into identifying the need and kind of the implications and the needs payoff, right? So things like the pain or gain of what's happening here, outcomes they're trying to drive, how it impacts revenue, and then whether the process, system, information, et cetera, already exists and it's just not working really well, or if it needs to be original create, because that's going to have a lot to do with how you and your team can help. And then the last piece is on driving urgency. So is this need to have or is this critical? What's the timeline that they're thinking in terms of when they want it delivered, right? If it's brand new create, and this is the first you're hearing from them and they want it delivered at their team meeting on Thursday, it's probably challenging. If this is, if they're doing a major launch or a new solution, and you're going to be helping out with some resources along the way, super helpful when you have visibility into that. And then how does this get prioritized relative to other initiatives that you already have in play? Because you may need to renegotiate some of those deliverables or milestones, either with this particular person or with somebody else in your department. So here are some of the questions that you might ask. I've just organized them around these situation, pain, implication, needs, payoff, and urgency and prioritization questions. So think about things like, tell me about the situation, or tell me what you're doing today and what have you tried that's working well, what's not so well. Implications and need payoff questions are things like, tell me a little bit about what's at stake. Have you missed some revenue targets, or what's the level of engagement of your team, or have you gotten some poor customer feedback that you're hearing? Where are you getting that context from? How would this type of solution impact the bookings or the revenue that you're driving for? And then really specific around the metrics or outcomes that we should be driving. This is really important. You're going to spend time on this as an enablement person or team, that you're both focused on what do we believe that this is going to actually impact, why do we believe it, and how are we going to measure it? And then last but not least, urgency and prioritization, right? So you want to make sure that you and them are aligned on timeline, both delivery and anything in between, right? So it might be that you've got a month to work on this, but it might be that 2 of the weeks, the person that is supposed to be your subject matter expert is on vacation. So understanding, key members of the team, who are those folks, who are the subject matter experts we should be working with. If you yourself is the subject matter expert, what does that mean for other work that you have or your team has to do? And who might need to negotiate or renegotiate some of that with? Does this take a higher priority than something that might be competing with your ability to deliver on that capacity? And then I find the racing framework super helpful, right? So who's responsible for this? I would start with accountable. Who delegates the work and should be reviewing the task or deliverable before that's completed? That might be your internal customer. It might be you. It might be somebody else. Then who's responsible? Who's actually doing the work or aspects of the work? Who needs to be consulted? So whether it's subject matter experts, it could be other sales managers or leaders who need to be domain experts, or they may need to be bought in to what actually the outcomes are that you're trying to drive and that sort of thing. And then who or what needs to be informed. Sometimes it's a who, right? Sometimes it's for information that rolls up to the board. In other cases, it might be that the marketing team needs to know that there's some feedback from this deliverable that they need to change some talk track for. Or in other cases, it may be that it replaces something in your onboarding program or other pieces. So thinking beyond the deliverable. But I hope this is helpful. If as I said, my business is toying with this idea. Always happy to nerd out on all things sales enablement and effectiveness. And hope your discovery goes well and intake goes smoothly.